What is up, guys, and welcome back to Rising Thrills. And let me just tell you this, 2025 was a crazy year in the amusement industry, and I would say even not just in the amusement industry. There was plenty other of crazy things that happened in 2025. It was just an insane year. Even in the middle, I was like, wow, this is going to be an insane year. In the middle of last year, I was like, wow, this is going to be an insane year. And let me tell you, it was an insane year. And, just some insane things happened outside of the amusement industry and inside of the amusement industry. The main thing that did happen, of course, was the Six Flags and Cedar Fair merger, of course. I mean, that was even the year before in 2024. They finalized the merger, and that went the whole way back to 2023. But the most things that happened in 2025 in the amusement industry were caused because of this merger, or were a side effect of this merger, whatever, in some way links back to it. I mean, there was other things that happened, but that's the main thing that really stands out when you think of 2025. And firing and hiring of different people in the amusement industry with Six Flags and even some other companies. But overall, it was an insane year in the amusement industry, and like I said, even outside of the amusement industry, it was insane. I mean, just the amount of people that passed away in 2025, the amount of stories that happened, major headlines, news stories, whatever it was that happened in 2025, there was a lot of things that happened. So I thought in today's video, why not go back and recap all of 2025, the craziest news stories, the craziest things in the amusement industry, and kind of not necessarily rank them, but like go through the year and talk about everything and give my opinions now that the year has finished. Okay, guys, so the first story that I want to talk about, I'm not necessarily going to go through these in numerical order or the date that they happened on, or the date that the news story broke. I'm just going, more of, when I personally talked about these incidences. But the first thing that happened this year that I wanted to talk about that was of major significance was that Herschend announced that they would be buying Palace Entertainment, which is a subsidiary of Parque Rhinos, which has a lot of parks over in Europe. So this was very interesting. I mean, because Palace Entertainment, I thought that they were pretty strong and pretty, well off. I mean, they didn't add a lot to their parks that they had. It was very sparse investment. But overall, they did look like great parks. But it does make sense for Parque Rhinos to want to sell off all these parks because, first of all, they're based in Europe, and it's a lot harder to operate parks from Europe with parks in the United States as well. So, it made sense what they wanted to do, and I do think it is a good thing to see Herschend buying the Palace parks. And we'll see later that Herschend bought more parks than just the Palace parks, but I thought this was a good idea, and I thought it was a good decision that they made to sell all the Palace parks to Herschend, which include parks like Dutch Wonderland, Kennywood, Lake Compounce, Adventureland in Iowa. But overall, I did think this was a good decision. It's definitely good to see Herschend growing. I mean, they operate their parks really good. I personally haven't been to any park that has been operated by Herschend, but from what I've seen, it looks like Herschend really operates their parks to a good standard. Okay, guys, so moving on to the next story, and I really think this is the most groundbreaking and the most major announcement that we had in 2025, and that is that Six Flags Entertainment Corporation announced that they would be permanently shutting down Six Flags America in Bowie, Maryland at the end of the 2025 season. This was, in my opinion, I think this is the most insane story that happened in 2025, and really, the saddest, the most depressing, the worst thing that happened in 2025. And it's just the fact that this wasn't the only major thing that we had happen in 2026. Now, of course, like I said, the last thing I do think was a positive thing, but a lot of these, unfortunately, aren't positive. Like this, of course, like I said, Six Flags America was announced to be permanently closed. And long story short, of course, they did close it down at the end of the season. And there hasn't been too much work happening at the Six Flags America site yet. Everything is still basically intact. Most likely this will be sold to some sort of company for redevelopment, whether that be homes being built on this plot. I know there was a lot of people discussing a lot of different companies wanting to build AI data centers on this plot, and I believe there were some other things that I can't think of right now. But it's really still to be determined what this plot will be used for. And really, yes, I didn't like what happened, and I really wish they would have stayed open. But overall, I don't think it was a terrible thing what happened. They could have made it a lot worse. I mean, thankfully, they gave us a whole season. They announced this at the beginning of the season, so we had a whole season to go there and such. So, I mean, yes, it is very bad, and I want to be sympathetic to the people that, this is their home park, and, people that really love this park. I personally, I never really loved this park. It was a good park, I'll say that. They did have some good rides, but overall, it needed a lot of work, and Six Flags, I don't think Six Flags could have ever have been able to put the work into this park that it needed. I mean, it was just plagued with issues. It had a reputation of, kind of not really a family park. It was more, for teenagers and young adults to go to, and, it had a lot of bad reputations, and it didn't get that much investment for years, which was a major point to why it didn't have that high attendance, and of course that was the reason why they shut down the park. I do think what they did was necessary for Six Flags, but it is unfortunate what they did, and I really thought if they did sell it to another company, maybe Hershey or something, they could have, turned the park around and really build it up. But I mean, it's just location where it is. The land is so valuable, and I don't really think any other park chain could really afford to do anything with this park. That's the thing. Like, even Six Flags, of course, couldn't afford to do anything with it. But it is, in the end, what they ended up having to do. Unfortunate, but overall, it was pretty insane to hear this news, and I was just blown away almost when I heard this news. But now moving on to the next story. Thankfully, in 2025, we didn't have too many ride closures. I can't really think of many, but next is a ride closure, unfortunately, and that was that Superman Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain was announced to be permanently closed. So, of course, this is bad news, but thankfully, some people consider this a coaster and some people don't, so it's not really a major loss, in my opinion, at least. And, yes, it's major that it closed down, because I believe this was like the third or fourth tallest coaster in the world before it closed. I'm not exactly sure where it ranked, but it was in the 400s. So they're not tearing down the tower for this ride. They just are closing down the ride, but the drop tower that is connected to the tower will remain operational for the time being, at least. That is what has been happening. So overall, just a minuscule ride closure, not a major ride closure, but it is something of note, and a record-breaking ride, at least, that they closed. So definitely a major attraction to be shut down entirely. And then moving on to the next story, this is the second or third most major story to cover in 2025, and that was that Six Flags Entertainment Corporation, they decided to remove the position of park president at every single Six Flags park. So now what they have done is basically have regional managers. So like in my area, I believe that like Dorney Park and Six Flags Great Adventure have like one regional manager for those parks. There might even be some more parks within that area, but like down in Texas, I know the two Six Flags parks there, over Texas and Fiesta, Texas, they just have one park like general manager or regional manager of Jeffrey Seberg down there. So I do think it is bad what they did, because it really makes it so that it's harder to, so if someone that works at the park or really anybody wants to get in touch with the park president, it's a lot harder to get in touch with a general manager or a regional manager compared to a park president. And I believe there were some other positions that they decided to get rid of, like marketing and social media and some other things like that, that they just, basically turned into regional positions. So one person is doing a bunch of different parks, which made it so that they can't really connect to the park. They don't know all the things about one park. So, for social media and for marketing. So, a lot of this stuff, like the social media, and a lot of people are saying they're really getting a lot less. A lot less is happening on those platforms and such because a lot of positions were gotten rid of, so it's a lot more for one person to do, and if you need to get in touch with someone, it's a lot harder because it's regional positions. For a lot of positions, they did that for. So really, at the time, I was like, I don't know if it's a big deal, but I think that it wasn't a good decision what they did, and really, they could have done it a lot differently, and it would have come out a lot better. Some parks, they could have gotten away with that, just have one person for two parks, but they really needed to evaluate it, I think, before they just did that, because there have been a lot of bad things that have happened because of that, and, it's always a lot better when you just have one person for each position at each park, so then if you need to get in touch with someone, people can be closer to people at each park, and it's less things for one person to do, and really to the public we get a lot more out of it when you have multiple positions and not just regional positions. But now moving on to the next story. Really, they're not major stories, but I just wanted to cover it because I did cover it earlier in the year, so I just wanted to recap on it. The licensing agreement with Cedar Fair and the Peanuts has gone up. I believe that it was a couple months before it was set to be expiring. So a lot of us were thinking, maybe Cedar Fair is not going to be using the Peanuts theming anymore, maybe coming up with a unique theming or switch over to the Looney Tunes or something. But fortunately, Cedar Fair did decide to renew that, I believe, till 2030. So I do think it is a great thing. For a lot of people, Cedar Fair, when they think of Cedar Fair parks, they do think of the Peanuts and such things as that. And it's a major part of the Cedar Fair parks. And I do think it is good for them to have the Peanuts theming. I am definitely for the Peanuts theming, and I do think it's a good thing they renewed it. But that still doesn't mean that they can't, down the road in 2030 or after that, they could decide not to renew it and then, go with a plan of unique theming or Looney Tunes or whatever they want to do. So overall, I do think it was a good thing what they did, and, definitely unique. And another story of the theming nature is Hershey Park announced for their Halloween event, Hershey Park Dark Nights, that they decided to re-theme Laugh Track, which Shackalicious is Shaquille O'Neal's gummies that are made by the Hershey's Chocolate Company. So, people had mixed opinions about this. In terms of the actual ride, I didn't necessarily like the ride when they had it for Halloween. Now, they did decide to keep this over Christmas, and I definitely preferred it a lot more the way they had it over Christmas, because it didn't have as many flashing lights and it didn't have as much loud noises as it did during Halloween, and I do think it was an upgrade, the Christmas overlay, compared to the Shackalicious Halloween overlay. And, overall, I do think it's good that they decided to work with him to do this, and it was definitely something unique for them to have over this season. And I believe it's not going to be returning in 2026. I'd assume not, but who knows? Maybe it will. But overall, just very minuscule stories. And overall, I think they were good. But now moving on to the final couple of stories here. And the next story is another story revolving around Hershey Park, and that was a major mainstream media, all sorts of people covered this. It went, very viral, and that was at Hershey Park. A kid was able to get up onto the monorail and walk on the track, and there was a lot of misinformation, a lot of not accurate reporting going on, I heard on some news sites they were saying a kid was over 100 feet off the ground, and the monorail, at no point is it over 100 feet off the ground. At most, it's like 30, if even that, probably like 25 feet, and that's when it's over on top of the bridge that's over Spring Creek. So at the point he was, it couldn't have been more than like 15 feet off the ground. So, overall, I do think a lot of people were making a bigger deal than it was. But, I mean, overall, it was a bad thing that happened, of course, since the monorail. And it's another news story of itself, probably, that the monorail didn't open since spring for the entire 2025 season at Hershey Park. It barely operated at all, which was kind of weird. From what I heard, it sounded like it was struck by lightning. I'm not sure if that was a car or that was the track or what. So hopefully this season they can get that fixed and they can get the monorail back open. But overall, it was definitely weird to see that happening. And then we have really, this is multiple different news stories that happened multiple different times, but they're all connected. So I will really just put them all together into just one story, kind of, to say. So that is that Six Flags announced back in, I believe it was like October or November, sometime around there, that the CEO of Six Flags, Richard Zimmerman, would be stepping down. And this was a major story, lots of people covering it in the amusement industry, and, my opinions are kind of mixed. I do think it is a good decision for them to do that. For a good decision for him to step down. And, lots of different people have their different opinions. Was he forced to step down? I don't think he was forced to step down. I think he just evaluated and said, it'd probably be best for him to step down. But, I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't forced to step down, or at the very least, maybe he was encouraged by other people in the company. But overall, it was a major story. And, he was to remain CEO until they found a CEO, and thankfully they did, and that is John Riley, and he looks like he's going to do great things with Six Flags. He was formerly in the SeaWorld company. I'm not sure what his position was. I believe it was like CFO or like finance director, some sort of position, high-level position in SeaWorld, and now he's in Six Flags. So what he did at SeaWorld, I think, was he did some pretty good things, and, really brought them to a good place, because they had a bunch of controversies going on before he came to SeaWorld. So hopefully he can do the same thing with Six Flags and, bring down the debt and all sorts of things. Hopefully he turns out to be a good CEO, but overall it was just insane to hear that. I mean, it's insane the amount of CEOs they're going through, but overall hopefully this will be a good change to have John Riley as a CEO. And then next, we had another story, which was that Salim Basool, who was the chairman of the board at Six Flags, was going to step down too, which Salim Basool was formerly the CEO of the Legacy 6 chain. So this was definitely very interesting. I didn't see that happening, to tell you. I didn't predict that, but Salim Basool definitely wasn't the best CEO, and, I'm not sure what all he did as chairman of the board. Because, the chairman of the board, you're not really hearing about what they do. And, a lot of times the CEO gets blamed for things more than, like, the chairman of the board. But, definitely interesting. So going forward, I guess we'll be seeing a lot of new faces at the Six Flags chain. Basically the two head figures in Six Flags step down, so really it seems like a completely different company now. And lastly, there's another thing to do with the Six Flags board of directors or Six Flags majority stakeholders and such. Travis Kelce, who is a football player, a figurehead, and a company that he is connected with, have become majority stakeholders in Six Flags. I believe it's like $20 million. I forget the exact number of how much they invested, but now I guess they will be on the board of directors at Six Flags. So it would be interesting to see what Travis Kelce will do, what decisions he makes. I don't know if it'll be directly him, but at least the company he's connected to will be making decisions for Six Flags going forward. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and it is what it is. Anyone can invest into any company if it's being publicly traded. So I won't comment too much on that, but overall it's definitely interesting to see Travis Kelce invest in Six Flags. But that's about all the stories we have for 2025. It was a lot to unpack, a lot to cover, and really major stories. And 2025 was a major year. Lots of things happening, and it really just blew my mind. It's like, whoa. I can't even believe this amount of things happened in 2025. So many things, and And like I said earlier, 2026 looks like it might be just as crazy as 2025. I'm predicting that it might be just as crazy. Not necessarily that we see any parks shut down, not necessarily that we see any positions change in Six Flags or any chain, but there will definitely be some crazy things happening. I do predict that. So, I'll probably end up doing this a yearly tradition where I go back and recap the year, all the major news stories, and just talk about it. Maybe I'll give it a ranking each year as to the level of insanity of the level of breaking news stories or whatever way I decide to rate all of these happenings, I guess you could say, in the amusement industry. But overall, 2025 was an insane year. Comment down below what you thought of 2025. What are your opinions on all of these news stories? If you're not already subscribed, make sure you go down and subscribe. And make sure you share the video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.